I flew to a physical place, to Redwood, California, for what was essentially the Christmas of our industry. And CMX, you stuck that landing. Every year in the community industry, there are a chief few things that we look forward to. Signposts or flags throughout the year that tell us what the community industry's health really is. Specific reports like the Edelman Trust Barometer, and then there are conferences like CMX's Thrive Summit. And this particular year was particularly special because we were actually meeting physically for the first time since the pandemic happened. It was a highly special feeling, incredible sense of belonging. The talks were a notch up from what you would typically expect at a conference because people were capable of getting back to the things they loved rather than the things that they were rushing. So this video is all about us reviewing what happened at CMX, and it's a lot. So I need to break this down into several parts. First, we need to cover the vibe of the event itself. There's no getting around that vibe. But then we're going to dive into a few example talks that I really hope that you'll revisit with the virtual talks that are going to come out. And then I want to zoom out. Just like all of our industry does, we need to talk about the trends and the patterns that came about across all of those different talks, because that's really going to tell us what the next year is going to look like and what we as community professionals need to focus on. And then we do kind of need to talk about the downsides. But before we get started, I want to tell a story. Back in 2017, I was bright-eyed and doe-eyed and just came out of college with a super shiny, super new degree with a specialization in virtual worlds. The problem was I didn't know how the internet itself worked. So I joined digital marketer. As an intern at digital marketer, I received a ticket to a conference that cost $1,500. At that event that cost $1,500, as a doe-eyed intern who had no idea the kind of value I was actually listening to, I met a man. And that man attended a chief 4 sessions before he came out of one of his sessions and said, "That man is a genius." And he left the $1,500 conference. He already got his $1,500 worth for his ticket because he found the one thing that he needed to implement this year in order to move his business from where it was to the next stage that he needed. Once he knew that, he knew what he needed to focus on. It's that kind of notion, that kind of lesson that I hope that you'll take from CMX. You need to plan big, you need to collect all of these things, but it's way too overwhelming. So plan big and progress small. Find that one thing. What's really going to impact you between now and the next conference to make your community healthier, to prove the ROI of that community, to get your executive team on board? What is that big issue? And then come back for the next thing to make it better. And with that, let's jump into the overwhelmingly amazing conference that was CMX Thrive. As said before, this was the first time that we had actually gotten to meet physically. But when I landed and I met my friends in the workshop, and Tiffany Oda welcomed me to the first workshop session of the workshop day, all I felt was camaraderie and family. I saw a lot of "how are yous? Did you survive? How did you survive? Are you stressed?" To see the community industry is really just a bunch of mama bears, and a lot of us mother geese love to hen and connect and build friendships and really get to the heart of self-disclosure. We understand how to be vulnerable in business, and it's that vulnerability that brings people closer. The very practice of community was on display every single second of this conference.
I feel like this is a release, right? Like getting together in person, you get to vent with each other, talk to each other.
Honestly, I can say the biggest takeaway I had was to reproduce that feeling somehow. That was the holy grail of what it means to be a community builder in this industry. And of course, there was also my talk, which will be available on CMX and also right here on the YouTube channel. You can also see a talk that I was already planning to give and actually provided as a video as well. So be sure to watch that video and subscribe here in order to see the next video set. Let's talk about someone who is absolutely super fantastic and someone you should listen to. The keynote speaker was Priya, who created this incredible book called The Art of Gathering. I think it's critical that we take from Priya's keynote conversation the fact that gatherings are finite. They are small and they are repetitive. So be sure to watch Priya's talk when the conversations come out at mid-October. We're going to move on from that. We need to talk about Richard Millington's brand new metric, the Community Impact Score. We are going to be spending a lot of time actually breaking down this talk, this conversation, in around mid-October in our Discord. The Community Impact Score is essentially an evolution of, and let's be real, throw the baby out with the bathwater, a complete revolution of the Net Promoter Score. The issue with the Net Promoter Score has always been that it convolutes the score across a variety of different events. Instead of taking a singular NPS metric to say this is what people actually think of our business or our community, we will create individual NPS scores like employee NPS or transaction NPS every time someone buys a product on the e-commerce site. eNPS stood for either event or email. And suddenly you're juggling around 5 different NPS scores trying to figure out what exactly that means, when in all reality, it was about whether or not you have impacted the community's health in any way based upon your personal actions. We are going to be breaking it down in the Discord over the course of the next month, so be sure to join the Discord in order to grab that talk. And now let's talk about a model, which I think is really fantastic because, truth be told, I keep coming back to it over and over and over again. Pablo Gonzalez has become somewhat of a friend since he but he did kind of unintentionally standardize the point of a community flywheel. Orbit and Rosie Sherry and a lot of other community managers had really talked about using content and assets in order to build online community instead of just saying ritual content, let's just build it willy-nilly. There was always this concept of what do you need? Let's provide content about that. Great, we've provided content about that. Let's find experts to engage with it. And then we'll use those experts to create conversations, and it goes round and round and round, which sounds easy until you actually, try. And that's where Pablo, who is a content specialist, provided an incredibly powerful and really robust structure for accomplishing community content flywheels. Let's stop talking about the bigger keynotes, aside from my humble brag that I got a signature from David Siegel, which is super fun and fantastic. The stage was chock full of people. Down in the description, we have a completely free, totally public, community-built note-taking doc. So you can actually go right now and read all of the takeaways for that doc. Fun fact, you can also contribute to that when the videos come out in October. One of the talks that I want to talk about is Alfredo Moresse, who spoke about what data actually means. And we're starting to get a lot more collaboration with the wider marketing and data analytics and reporting teams in online community. That's a part of community now being a legitimate portion of business industry. We are now receiving data structures and data flows that actually reflect the impact of our community. If we want to be a community-led business, we need to do what business relies on most: the data. When we tell a story about our communities, we really need to be telling that story based upon the data. Follow the story that the data is telling us. And as Alfredo says, it is up to us to follow the data, because the data will not follow us. And what's more, data grows every day. And it's not necessarily a complicated process, but with a lack of organization and a lack of understanding of the data that's coming in, we feel like it is growing increasingly complex. And the reality is the data is quite simple in structure. It is just growing beyond what we can individually comprehend. We need to build infrastructure that allows us to process that data on the day-to-day. Alfredo ends his talk by saying you should automate. In the process of automating that information, you will, by default, produce more data, and in a way that is less underwhelming. Let's kind of take a break from the big structured conversation and let's talk about a really emotional, empathetic moment about how stories build community and how togetherness, crisis, and empathy love, and just making the ask produces a powerful community response that can take over and galvanize an entire virtual community all over the world. We had a talk from Yurii Lazaruk, who was in Ukraine. And his conversation, really, really emotional, was all about being able to build a community by using really well-known community experiences in order to stock and build a sense of empowerment around people being able to help in the Ukraine crisis. People on Twitter and using Meta were capable of building infrastructure in online spaces to tell people where to go. It helped the people who were on the ground suffering in a very critical moment of their lives. And he summed it up with 3 primary words: connection, kindness, and skill. It's that kind of notion that reminded me a lot of Zeynep Tufekci's Twitter and tear gas. The notion that these powerful temporary movements in online social media epicenters are, in and of themselves, long-term forthright communities. And now the question is, how to do that. And that's where we get into our next talk with Rachel Hartley. I love Rachel. She is a really, really great new friend of mine, and her framework is incredible. And it's this notion that's very similar to the communication constitutes organizations theory, but it's primarily focused on building playbooks and building roles and figuring out what your community has superpowers for, building infrastructure to allow them to do that thing without you needing to be involved. And every single department within your organization is responsible for this model. I highly recommend actually listening to this entire talk. It's actually pretty incredible. Would now like to transition out of the special talks kind of phase, I know that was a little bit long, in order to kind of zoom out and talk about trends and patterns. I've been really rough about the concept of Web3. Web3 had to justify, connect, describe itself, and come to ground with the rest of the community industry. The technologies, the developments, the onboarding paths, the level of diversity and the capacity for them to grow and change on a hyper rapid pace is just untold. But at the same time, it does feel a lot like the dot-com boom. Web3 has now grounded itself as a discussion for a future of innovation. I'm going to step back into social science in order to explain this. There is a difference in social science between a culture and just simply the context. Where culture is all of the past things that led to the present, the context is simply a recognition that there is a present and that it does need to change. Web3 has now brought a new context into online community, and that new context has created a sense of possibility and innovation that is not bogged down with the history of virtual culture. Web3 is all over the place. There's a lot of problems with it, but the powerful trend and pattern that I saw at CMX as we learned more about this new mysterious aspect of community management is that it is really here to rethink, like a brand new employee stepping into a company and asking, why are we doing this again? And I also want to discuss another really powerful trend because this is something that I felt every single second and every single moment on the ground. I actually brought a prospective client to CMX, and that prospective client actually approached me and said, hey, I'm really sorry, but we need to grab a contract from another consultant to compare and contrast. And I just said, yeah, totally. Sounds great. In fact, here's a few people that you might want to reach out to in order to win that contract from them. Community consultancies, as well as community software platforms, have an abundance mindset, a notion that we can lift each other in networking with one another and fitting each other into the best possible fit for these communities. This notion of coopetition, cooperative development of each other's communities for the sake of getting networking later on down the line, the way that YouTubers would build and share each other's audiences using collaborative videos, despite the fact that there was an algorithm pitting them against each other, allowed us as community members, community marketers, community coordinators to recognize that the abundance mindset is about creating more space for individuals, and that more space comes out of cooperating with people who would otherwise be at each other's necks competitively. At the floor, we saw Orbit, we saw Common Room, we saw Orbit, we saw Discourse, and we saw incited. All of these amazing platforms and these amazing solutions and infrastructure come to the community space with completely different philosophies for how communities work. These philosophies are working together to solve a problem in multifaceted ways, and we need to increase the problem space. We are in a divergent and emergent phase for the philosophy of community. And speaking of community intelligence platforms such as Orbit and Common Room, we also need to talk about the fact that we have software now. Here's how we should measure community. Here's how we should process the data. Qualitative data actually matters. We need to be using that qualitative data in order to understand the health of our communities. We need to separate the measurement and the development of community ROI from the empowerment of community value. That was a huge takeaway from Brian Oblinger's talk. Community managers are now formally supported, and it's time now that we move that over the next year into a conversation with the already established systems that we have in our businesses. That means the marketing funnel. We as community managers need to stop fighting against that marketing funnel and saying that we can't be measured and start saying, hey, we have a new system, a new way, a new potential integration that will allow us to say, hey, marketing, here's what community is doing to help you. Hey, sales, here's some leads that are definitely going to have great quality and give you a leg up because we already know that person. That's a powerful trend and a powerful pattern that I highly recommend over the course of the next year, you as a community manager dive into and learn. And with that, I want to reflect on my experience with the CMX community. It was absolutely phenomenal. The best conference I think I have ever been at. I want to stress that the CMX team did phenomenally. I also want to stress that there were some problems. Beth and David were gone. There was a lot of conflict that had happened behind the scenes. As a speaker, my initial talk, which is available on my YouTube channel for a reason, was indeed canceled. And my panel, a half hour about diversity, is going to be discussed in a larger amount. And the reason for that was because we had a brand new team at CMX. And it's in that notion, in that criticism, that I want to also offer a kudos, a lollipop. They definitely illustrated one of the most important things that you could learn. One of the things that I struggle to inform my clients over and over again. Mistakes make better plans. As long as you can pivot and maintain an iterative strategy, you can build something phenomenal out of your failings. Overall, I can say that my time at CMX was absolutely incredible. Will I go again? Probably, yeah. But there are going to be a lot of machinations, things behind the scenes, solutions that need to be handled. But I look forward to seeing what CMX is going to look like next year. Again, it was the best conference I had been to, but I would largely attribute that to the people who were there and the absolutely phenomenal environment and space that they created for a sense of belonging. Thank you so much for watching this review. Again, we are going to have the recording of my talk, a diversity talk, available right here. We do have notes in the description, and we are going to be breaking down Richard Millington's talk about the community impact metric that he had announced. So be sure to subscribe and join our Discord for future content on that. I recommend just looking through the notes. When you do get the CMX recorded videos, make sure that you do update the notes in order to provide your own takeaways. That living document is not just for the event, it's also for all of you who are experiencing the recordings. Until next time, bye.